So we're now up to our last speaker. You see the sun shining. Some people already go and sit in the sun because they were too cold. So that you can also sit in the sun, only not there because that's our view. Last speaker, Indy Johar. He's the co-founder and director of the Dark Matter Labs in London. He will tell you more about it. I think it's an international and multidisciplinary design team working across the globe to develop new methods for system change. We're very happy to have you here, Indy. Can I have a warm welcome for Indy Johar?
Hello. Okay. Firstly, I'm going to give away a few of my minutes. If you all get up, shake yourself about, just warm up, because I know you're all cold. All right? Let's warm up. Okay, cool. All right. So I'm gonna do this quickly. So I'm not going to be either optimistic. I'm going to try to describe. I think. Does it just forward? Yes. Yeah. Okay. I want to talk about. I think what you're doing here is really important. Really, really important. But I want to give it a different frame. And I want to give it a slightly different and challenging frame. I'm not going to talk about ourselves for a moment. You can find out about us. I want to talk about what the future looks like a little bit. Because I think we're talking about the future, largely ignoring the facts that are coming at us at very fast rates. So, how many homes do you think all of Europe can afford to build with the Paris Accord? All of Europe. How many homes a year? 0? If you're generous, you can get to 140,000 homes. If you're generous. All of Europe. All of Europe. UK alone wants to build 300,000. Berlin, I think, is looking at 350,000 homes over the next 4 years. So the reality of the world that's coming at us and even the reality of our carbon budgets are completely different. The most sustainable low-carbon house produced in Denmark, right? The most sustainable, got to 2.5 kilograms of carbon per meter squared per year. 2.5. Went from 9.5 average to 2.5. We need to get to 0.4 kilograms. You know, you've heard all these myths about we need to retrofit old cities. We need to retrofit all our cities. We don't have the carbon budgets. We don't have the materials. We don't have the labor forces to do this. So I want us to start to engage some of the hard realities of the world that we're facing. And in that context, I think we need to start to talk about the future in some of the kind of deep structural challenges that we're facing. Within the next 2 to 3 years, right, we are almost certainly going to face some form of food crisis. Already, food has gone up by 40% in terms of prices in the UK and 19.8% this year, just in terms of food prices. If you look at the mental health of the city, if you look at any of these big issues, the biodiversity losses. So what does this really mean? In which context? The numbers are extraordinary. 45% atmospheric CO2 increase since the 1950s. The cost to produce oil, right? So it used to cost something like 1 barrel of oil used to produce 100 barrels of oil. Now 1 barrel of oil produces only 10 barrels of oil. Our civilization as a whole, just to give you some ideas, 8 billion humans live on 500 billion human units worth of energy a year. So we're a civilization of 508 billion human units worth of energy. Now here's the killer. Between 2019 and 2020, all the installed renewables in the world from history were not equivalent to the global energy demand increase. So the increase in global energy demand was greater than all the installed renewables. So if you want to talk about the scale of the transition, you start to talk about it in a very, very serious way. You talk about actually topsoil losses, massive losses in our topsoil, the number of crop cycles left in our topsoil, nutrition loss that's on the topsoil, because soil is not understood as an asset. People talk about the trees, but they don't talk about the soil. How we value things is fundamentally out of kilter. Fishing, look at dead zones. We've got 40% decrease in plankton around the world, and they're systemically creating dead zones. I'll get to a reason why all this is important. Massive toxification. Pretty much all of us have got microplastics in our bloodstream already. So the scenarios that we're painting of the future aren't tomorrow. They're not possible scenarios. We're in them. We're right smack bang in them. And we've got diminishing returns on democracy, all sorts of issues on that level. The extinction level event, right? The number of species dying is faster than effectively, it's a sort of 1,000 times faster than normal. So when we talk about the ecological destruction, it's not some myths. Since the 1970s, if you look at the ecological destruction we've seen, is of an order of magnitude. Endemic diseases, pandemics, debt. Now this is where it gets interesting. These are all the accords. Nothing has changed. So when you look into the future, you're looking at a city which is going to be maybe up to 4.5 degrees warmer on average. Even if we go to 2 degrees global or 1.5 degrees global, cities will be significantly warmer. Significantly so. So you want to know what the problem is? This is all the wild animals in the world. All the wild animals. The zebras, the elephants, all of them. That's them. That's cattle. Right? That is, I think, that's sheep. That's all the people in the world by ton. So I want you to see the world. When people talk about the Anthropocene, it's not an idea. This is the zoo of all the animals in the world. That's the world we're living in. You want to talk about 2070? This is the projections of the 2070. All these areas around the world become actually not hospitable to human species, largely in terms of climatic environments. That is billions of people. So now start thinking about the future. So addressing that reality at a European level, energy demand, we've got a massive transformation in energy, massive transformation of our agricultural systems, massive transformation in our critical raw materials. So let's talk about minerals for a bit. When people talk about our future, we have a shortage of copper. We have a shortage of timber. We have a shortage of sand. So this is not some radical future. We're doing work around what does material net zero cities look like? Cities which do not import materials at all. What does that really mean? Because the reality is we don't have the carbon budgets. 80% of our ecological destruction is coming from our mineral mining around the world. And if we move to any form of electrified economy, that will massively increase because we go from an oil economy to a mineral economy. Massive destruction. So the question then becomes is, our cities are going to have to dematerialize? So the average Swede consumes 27 tons of matter a year. The global average is 2 tons. So we're going to have to massively dematerialize our economies. We can't afford the materials. We're going to have to massively make our materials circular, durable, and also biomaterially driven. Now, everyone says timber. We have a timber shortage already. It will take us 30 years to rebuild that supply chain. 30 years if we start investing now. So timber is not some simple solution. And then we've got to make sure every timber that we plant and we use, that tree, is sequestered for 100 years. So if you're using timber on the floor, outside decking, which is then going to be composted and released in 20 years, that doesn't work. Right? Sacrificial timber does not work. 100 years, you've got to sequester that for it to have meaningful use in terms of carbon and kind of carbon sequestration and any of those factors. So we're going to have a fundamental transformation in our economy. Now, when you start to look at that, that changes the nature of our cities. It changes how we build them. We cannot afford to build the homes of the future. So how are we going to equitably use our materials? How are we going to equitably use the materials we already have in our city? How are we going to actually use the environments that we already have? And this is where roofs become really important. Right? That's my killer. All the way to get here. Because that is an extraordinary amount of space and available use that doesn't require new infrastructure, new investments on the ground, and we're going to have to build it in radically different ways. Right? You're going to look at, yes, structural timber. Yes, you're going to look at textiles. I think most of the future is going to be textile woven fabrics over roofs in different formats. So we're going to have to change our material ecosystems. We're going to have to release space. If you are not using space, right, material sufficiency, if you're not using space, you're taking opportunity for someone else to use it. That is a social cost. Imagine a different type of tax system that looks into those futures. Because material hoarding in itself becomes a social problem. So the future looks radically different in different formats. So living into this future also invites all sorts of reimaginations of our relationship to the world. So climate change is not just it's not a crisis of carbon, it's a crisis of our relationship with the world. So, in terms of that chair, are we custodians of that chair? Are we custodians of the plastic, end-of-use plastics of that chair? Are we custodians of the end-of-use chrome on the legs of that chair? No, we don't give a shit. Because we buy and we let go. We're not custodians. We're not responsible agents in a chain of custodianship. So the idea of buying and selling becomes an anathema when we have to become custodians of those relationships. How do we go from a human dominion world of ownership, which allows us to ignore the costs on the development side and the end-of-use side, to a new form of treaty and relationship with the world? So my hypothesis to you is that the era of kind of human dominion and ownership comes to an end when you start to recognize we're living in an entangled world. An entangled world with different forms of relationship. And you're already seeing some of this, whether it's rivers being made self-sovereign, whether you're seeing actually forests being made self-sovereign in different formats, the rights of nature being developed. Now, why I'm saying all this, it goes back to kind of the workshop we were having amongst our group. Who owns the roof? What is a roof? Is it an interface? Is it a responsibility? Is it a social liability that if you're not using it well, you're introducing social costs? What is our theory of relationship to the roof? And I think that's going to all get reinvented. And it's going to have to be reimagined in different ways. I could use this example of a street tree. Any street tree out there is actually a social cost, is a cost on the balance sheet of local authorities, because they have to worry about the maintenance and they worry about the insurance. But all the ecological benefits, whether it's flood risk management or whether it's actually heat island effect, a tree-lined street reduces temperatures by 12.5 degrees on road maintenance costs, all the way to heat energy requirements of that street, those are all ignored because we don't value all the benefits on the other side. So we're accounting for the costs, but we're not valuing the social benefits. How do we reimagine these social benefits in different formats? How do we imagine This is a piece of work, sorry about the graphics, but this is a piece of work that we did on the social cost of a badly designed private house. All the social costs generated by a badly designed private house. It gets rid of this illusion of there being a private and a public. Value is entangled. How do we govern that entanglement of value? And I think roofs live in that world of entanglement. And you can see some of this stuff in the High Line. We did some work on the High Line in New York. Many of you will know it. It cost $174 million to make. But here's what. It generated $3.48 billion in land value uplift that was entirely privatized. So there was a civic good, which was effectively all the value was privatized. How do we rebuild the economy of civic common goods in that format? And there are loads of interesting ways of doing that. I love this quote, just to talk about even our relationship with materials, right? This is indigenous people in Taiwan, and they talk about you need to get permission from the river to borrow the stones nearby to build their houses and promise to return it when they've ended up finishing their use. Imagine a world with a completely different relationship to the materials in those futures. And this can be technologically assisted. We can build lots of interesting things. And you've got interesting examples, Embassy of the North Sea and various other things. So what happens if a forest owns itself? What happens if the roof owns itself? What happens if a building is self-sovereign? What happens if even the camera is self-sovereign? What happens in this future beyond ownership, where we actually recognize things as their own agents, not in dominions of the world? What happens when you unbundle the rights of a building, where the roof rights of the building can be let go and actually given to common use in different formats? How do you unbundle this? This technology can actually open up new ways of seeing our relationship with the world in really radical formats. And I think we have to reduce the friction of actually these common goods and allow them to be pooled and organized in really radical different ways. And there's loads of interesting things that I can talk about in terms of how you can start to do different accounting structures and other frameworks around that, which I think is really critical. So my major point is that actually roofs are going to be critical. We will not have the capacity, the material economy to expand our city and build spatial justice in the ways that we've done, saying, we'll just build some more homes. We won't have that. And how we look, you know what we used to talk about brownfield investment, brownfield redevelopment. Roofs are going to be the future. Roofs and elevations are going to be the brownfield developments of the future. And you're building the economy of that transition. And the question is, how do we build it in a really radically new way? Not just materially, but actually in terms of how we govern, own, and share the value of that. With that, I thank you, and thank you for all the great work that you're all doing.
Also a question for you, Indy, I think. But first, I'm only thinking I have to look this back on YouTube. This was so much information and so inspiring. Someone really wants to ask a question, or you have to go to the toilet. So sorry, Matilda. Yes, all speeches are recorded. Yeah, listen to this again. Yeah, we do. It goes to... Mirjam, where are you? Oh, there she is. I'm going to ask her to ask a question to Indy. Do you dare?
Yeah.
Yes, come over here. Because she's not the speaker, but I want her on stage. Because Mirjam is our rooftop hero of last year. And after this, we're going to the rooftop hero of this year.
So, Indy, you talk about pace, right? And the challenges are speeding in a far more faster pace than we transform. So do you have any ideas of how to speed up with all of us?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think first thing is to change the frame of the conversation. I think we've forgotten certain things. Like, I think we need to be thinking about the next 20 years more akin to how redevelopment of Europe happened after World War II. Think like that. Don't think like the last 40 years. It's irrelevant. The scale of transformation is more akin to rebuilding Europe because the foundational systems, energy, food, water, minerals are all changing. All of the foundational minerals of our economy, the matters of our economy are changing. So we have to start to think at that scale of transformation. This isn't a minor continuum variant. And I think we have to talk, we spoke about how Rotterdam was rebuilt after World War II, right? I think we're going to rebuild Rotterdam, right? We have to start to think like we're rebuilding Rotterdam. It's fundamentally out of order. If you looked at the carbon and energy and the mineral uses, we're out of whack. Like, the future is not electric vehicles. Anyone who tells you this is lying to you. They're lying. If you look, a typical electric vehicle, I'm sorry, I'm just going to do a typical electric vehicle, right? I'm going off on one, but the future typical electric vehicle will take nearly 200,000 miles, after which it starts to consume less carbon than an electric vehicle, than a normal petrol vehicle, right? The amount of mineral damage, so 80% of our biological losses are driven by minerals, right? 80%. So the amount of damage we're going to do as we expand our mineral economy, which we will do, we will go from an oil to mineral economy. We're going to have to do it in radically different ways. So think of this, and my major point is start seeing this much more like World War II, rebuild. It's not a marginal conversation. You are rebuilding Rotterdam. We are rebuilding London. We are rebuilding all of Europe in a radically different way. And that also invites us to challenge all our theories of ownership, governance, equity, justice. All those things are going to be up on the table in a way they've never been. And I think that's happening everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.